Mic check 1 2. Mic check 1 2. Mic check 1 2.
Well, good afternoon, and thanks for joining us again today. This is the 28th of July, and we have, I think, a pretty full agenda to talk about today. But as I have before, let me start by talking about what has happened over the weekend with COVID-19. We logged our 2,000th lab-confirmed positive case of COVID-19. Today, that number stands at 2,136 lab-confirmed cases with an additional 453 probable cases. If you've been marking this, you'll see that we are starting to move up pretty aggressively, and that's very concerning, and I'll tell you why in a moment, but I bet you already know. There are currently 1,615 recoveries among our lab-confirmed cases, leaving us 521 active lab-confirmed cases. 521, that is up substantially from where we were a few weeks ago at under 300. On Monday, we had 43 lab-confirmed cases, and there were 64 new confirmed cases today. That's the highest daily total that we have seen to date. Total deaths stand at 26 today. And I'm very sad to report we had one more today. That person passed away in Uintah County, and my heart goes out to the family and the friends of that individual who passed away. We've been watching closely as Wyoming cases rise, and that is very concerning. Those cases have risen over the past 14 days, but I have to say our rate of positivity is now 2.8%. Nationally, that compares favorably with a 9%. I just got off a phone call with the White House in which we were comparing notes between states. My good friend Governor Lee of Tennessee was describing what he was having to do to curb the spike that he's seen there. My other friend Doug Ducey of Arizona also spoke about the things that he's had to do to start to trend down the positivity cases that they've seen. We'll talk about that in a second. But let me say that the Vice President Pence, was very encouraging today, saying that we're starting to see some factors start to change to the positive. And we're starting to see a slight decline in the rates in some of these cases that are spiking so much. Well, what it means for Wyoming is that our statewide dashboard remains unchanged this week. The categories of new cases and new hospitalizations continue to be listed as concerning. According to CDC data, Wyoming is doing pretty well compared to many other states around the country. The number of cases of COVID-19 per 100,000 people in Wyoming is the 8th lowest of any state in the country. Only Alaska has seen fewer COVID-19 deaths. And I'm happy to say that we're also trending pretty well compared to our peers in terms of total number of cases. And so that's encouraging. Wyoming has demonstrated a degree of responsibility here that we need to further practice and make sure that we don't lose focus. We are seeing the highest growth in new cases in younger age range, 19 to 29-year-olds. These are the same people that we've seen the spikes occur in other places around the country. It is the reason why Doug Ducey and others have sought to close bars to make sure that they can start to stem that flow of new cases. We, of course, have not closed bars, but when things get so far out of hand, as they have in Florida, in Arizona, and Texas, all Republican governors and all Republican governors have said the last thing we wanted to do, but the first thing we had to do was to close our bars. Many of our new cases are coming from gatherings, whether it is family or friends, gathering in close proximity. We have also, unfortunately, seen cases among our inmate population, and that continues to be a big concern. Some of the new cases are asymptomatic. Staff and healthcare employees in the Wyoming State Penitentiary are being tested even as we speak. About 30 minutes ago, we announced the extension of our public current health orders through August 15th. We did so with the understanding that our case numbers continue to rise and our hospitalizations remain elevated compared to where the state was at the beginning of the month. We now have about 15 cases of hospitalization. And I don't need to remind you that we're not just worried about hospitalization rates for COVID patients. We're talking about making sure that we have room if somebody has a heart attack, as we had a young National Guard soldier passed away the other day, not from COVID, but from heart failure. We need to make sure that we have room to be able to meet the needs as they arise. We are also just a few weeks away from the opening of schools, and I needn't tell any parent, we're a grandparent now, but I don't need to tell any parent how essential it is that we're able to open our schools and let them work dependably to educate our kids and make sure that the rest of us are able to go to work and feel safe, that our kids are safe at school. Many school districts are still finalizing their Smart Start reopening plans, which they are required to submit to the Department of Education on August 3rd. If you've stayed tuned, if you've been tuned into this since early spring, this is an ongoing effort. We have been refining these Smart Start plans, and I really want to thank the superintendent for her leadership. But it is really time now that we have the school plans finally marked down and that we can look at them and be confident that the schools will open, they'll be safe, and that we have plans should we see in resurgences of this virus that we are well coordinated, well prepared. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Plans are being developed as an attempt to maximize the safety of everyone working and attending schools. It is a challenging task, and I want to recognize the hard work that is going into that planning process. So let me offer a bit of a brief update on the spending of the $1.25 billion in funds that were allocated to the state through the CARES Act. To date, going out the door, spent, leaving the auditor's office, a little over $300 million has gone out to meet business needs and other supply needs. The funding has included more than $100 million in business relief, $26 million in support for the University of Wyoming's reopening plan, $40 million for an expansion of COVID-19 testing, $35 million to local government support for counties on contact tracing and PPE. There is an additional amount that we are looking at that will continue to provide more supplies to community colleges, more supplies for unemployment, and we are also seeing the Wyoming Community Development Authority that has looked at new rules to make it easier for eviction, eviction protection. So look to the Wyoming Community Development Authority if you have any questions about what to do in the case of an eviction. We also allocated $51 million in CARES Act funding to support the operations of K-12 schools around the state. The money will support and the reopening of schools and include $42 million for technology to support distance learning and $9 million for personal protection equipment. We also started our process of distributing to local governments the amount of CARES money that was allocated to them by the legislature, and we are currently streamlining and improving that process to make sure that grant process works more efficiently and that we can get that money going out. We already have allocated substantial amounts of money to local governments. We'll be also looking at that same process. It became clear to us that really right now there's a rush to get as much money out the door as possible. We want to make sure that our communities are equitably dealt with, that just it isn't first to the trough, but that we have a process that works well really across the state for communities, for counties, and also for hospitals, so that we can get that money distributed correctly and properly. And there'll be more on that as the weeks go on. Next week, we plan to launch the next 2 rounds of our business support programs, the Relief Fund and the Mitigation Fund. These funds will provide an additional $112 million for businesses and nonprofits that have experienced hardship related to COVID-19 crisis. And for those in the agricultural community, we are putting a place marker in place as we get a better understanding of what's happening with calf crops and lamb crops. Obviously, we've already dealt to some degree with wool, but as we understand what's happening in the ag market through the months of September and October and November, we have put some funds aside to protect the agricultural industry. The Business Council will offer webinars on Thursday for businesses and nonprofits who want to learn more about applying for these programs. It's important to note that there are a number of nonprofits that have been hit hard by the circumstances, and we wanted to make sure this program got up and running to be able to make sure that nonprofits could provide the really essential services that they need to the citizens of Wyoming. So look for that as well. We are also continuing to work through additional programs and proposals to ensure that we are getting funds out the door as necessary. Let me stop for a second here and talk a bit about an update on the Craig. I believe over the next couple of hours, and perhaps by tomorrow morning, the Craig pacing study for July will be released. It's encouraging. You'll note that this pacing study will be based off of the May, which was an abysmal report, 800 to 1.5 billion loss of revenue. So this is an improvement over that. It's not really quite back to what we were hoping for, but it's about an improvement of about a little bit over $100 million to the positive. So instead of nearly 877 million most reliable loss, we're now at 759. So put that in context. If we eliminated all of WYDOT, there was no snow plow, there was no road construction, no highway patrol, no ports of entry, we wouldn't have dented that. If we cut education general fund in half, just right down the middle, we would barely touch that $759 million deficit that we're having to deal with. If we absolutely eliminated all higher education, all community colleges and the University of Wyoming, that still would not address that problem. So while it's improved, and while we're very happy about the improvement, mostly has come from the oil sector, we also face significant challenges going forward. And just to be clear, that doesn't mean we're going to relax our process of the 10% reduction and continuing to talk about a 20% reduction. Virtually every part of Wyoming is still going to have to look at what they're going to do to meet this budget shortfall that we have. There are a couple of people here that I'd like to point out that if people have questions, Stephanie Pyle and Clay Van Houten from the Wyoming Department of Health are here. Clay is an epidemiologist. Dr. Harris couldn't be here with us today, but Clay can answer a number of your questions on the very specifics that you might have. So we're prepared to take some other questions, but let me just leave you by saying we are approaching an absolutely critical time for our state's economy. It is good that this most recent Craig report has indicated that we have had an uptick in our sales tax revenues, both from what's generated in-state and what's online sales. Those are good factors. We want to make sure that our people feel safe going back to the store, making sure they can shop the way they want to. And it's exciting that Wyoming has stayed largely out of the national news. We've been able to keep our businesses open. People are going to get their hair cut. They're getting their nails done. They're getting the massages. They're able to go to the store, buy the things that they want to, and we've been able to do that by keeping our businesses open. I want to make sure that we are able to keep our schools open and that our students, and it really is a range of school districts really across the state, some very large, some very small, some with large cases of COVID, some without very many. And so sort of the one size fits all doesn't work. But I hope every Wyoming citizen and every Wyoming parent and every Wyoming student pays attention to the kind of responsible behavior that we've talked about right from the start, making sure that you keep that you wash your hands, making sure that you keep a socially respectful distance, 6 to 8 feet. That's good. Wear one of these. This one comes from Central Wyoming College. You know, and it's sort of interesting to me. It's really simple. If you're just dead set on taking down Wyoming's economy, don't wear these. If you're dead set on making sure our economy falters, wear one of these. Make sure that you put these on as you feel comfortable and you can, because these are the things that are going to keep us open and they're going to keep us moving forward. And we will move forward. We will have better days ahead of us. And I just want to thank the people of Wyoming for taking this responsibility so seriously. We aren't going to issue a statewide mask order in any of these new orders. We want to make sure that the people of Wyoming can take the responsibility on themselves. That's what we've counted on right from the start. So we're very hopeful that Wyoming stays open. And finally, I just want to remind you that August is primary month. It's coming up. And we're really hopeful to hear your voice heard. And remember, the choices you make for the representatives you have, those are going to be important choices for the future of Wyoming. So I encourage you to pay attention to what the candidates say, and I encourage you to vote your conscience. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions. And thank you again for tuning in today.
And that's the governor's press briefing today. And it took about 17 minutes, and we'll return to our regular programming.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived in Philadelphia. Local time is 3:05 p.m. and the temperature is 67 degrees. At this time,
I'm not sure that was a question. I didn't understand it. Okay. Next question.
Hey, Governor, this is Ethan Sternfeld from the Laramie Boomerang.
Yes, Ethan.
So I was wondering if you support using CARES Act money to help offset some of the costs of tuition at the university and the community colleges, as some people in the legislature have proposed.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. The legislature has proposed it. We're looking at it. It's in front of the Attorney General at this point. I've had a good conversation with President Seidel, and I think it's important that we try to get this scholarship monies out. It would be great for us to be able to do that, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get that done fairly soon. I am not sure that we'll be able to do a year in advance, but we certainly can meet some of the needs for current tuition, and so we're very, very anxious to get that done. Thanks. Next question.
Hi, Governor. Jim O'Reilly from Bigfoot 99 Radio.
Hi, Jim.
A question about what's happening at the state prison in Rawlins, the outbreak there. What can you tell us about the partial lockdown that's in place because of the outbreak, and what is being done to mitigate the outbreak and to use the phrase flatten the curve at the prison in Rawlins?
Okay, I'm going to let our epidemiologist, who has more detail, be able to talk to that. Thanks.
Hi, Jim. This is Clay. So just to address the cases in the Wyoming State Penitentiary, we do have a number of both inmates and staff that have tested positive over the last week. The warden and Department of Corrections have done a really good job trying to mitigate what's going on there. Of course, we've been working with them for over a month now on plans for increased testing and screening of all healthcare and DOC staff and also inmates over time. So we started that a couple of weeks ago. We did get the positives last week in Rawlins. So they're working really hard to mitigate what's going on in that facility. You know, obviously with this virus and these communal site type settings, it's really hard to keep that contained and under control and really out of those facilities. We saw that early on with the long-term care facilities, where a lot of times it's staff that introduce the virus into those settings. The staff are obviously out in the community. They're interacting with others. This can be spread person to person asymptomatically, so people don't even know they have it and they can transmit it. So I think it's a testament, honestly, to the Department of Corrections and their leadership over the last few months that they've been able to keep really it under control and out of their facilities. So they did implement certain control measures. I think, if you wanted more specifics about their processes within the facility, you could certainly reach out to Department of Corrections, but we are working with them very closely to work on mitigation efforts and make sure that things stays under control there.
I'm showing 15 positive case counts among inmates. Have they been separated from the general population?
They have. So they've done a really good job of isolating those cases. They have isolation units where they keep those cases isolated from the others in the population. The staff are out. Those that test positive, whether they're symptomatic or asymptomatic, those folks are going to be held out of work. We do have some folks that are quarantined that we do allow some modified quarantine for them to continue work, just because they would not be able to continue operations without those folks available for work. So they're keeping a close eye on those staff as well. And we plan on doing further testing, of course. They're keeping an eye on anyone who tests positive over time, where they get sick and they go to the hospital, get one of the rapid tests done there. So those will get reported right away. They'll keep an eye on those, and then of course just try to test as much as possible over the next few weeks to potentially identify any of those other asymptomatic positives that might be in the facility.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hello,
Hey.
Governor.
Yes.
This is Dustin Bleisefer on behalf of Wildfile.
Yes.
Thanks for holding this press conference and taking questions. We have some important elections coming up. How is Wyoming going to ensure that every resident can register to vote and can cast a vote in an accessible and safe manner during this pandemic?
So can you repeat that sort of slowly? It's a little hard to hear you here. I'm sorry.
Oh, my apologies. Yeah, with the elections coming up,
Yeah.
how is Wyoming going to ensure that every resident can register to vote and can cast a vote in an accessible and safe manner during this pandemic?
Sure. Well, thank you for that. Obviously, we have new machines this year. They've been tested. They've been brought up. We had a conference, or a press conference somewhat earlier in which the secretary spoke about what they had been able to do to test the machines, get them up and running. He has been reaching out to election judges. There are, and I think this is another reason why we want to make sure that we are mindful of the opportunity to wear masks. There are some election judges who are of that vulnerable age and cautiously wondering if they really want to be an election judge this year. And so we're making plans in the event that some of them just say, it's something I've thought about as my civic duty for years, but it's just too dangerous right now that I don't want to serve as an election judge. And so we're looking at ways to backfill election judges should that be necessary. So we do believe that we will have every opportunity to have a successful election. Nobody will have any difficulties being able to cast their vote. In fact, as I said, I'm encouraging every Wyoming citizen to get out and vote. We have an absentee process, and that process is something we've exercised for years. It's something our servicemen and women rely on if they're not able to get back to their polling place. So between the absentee process and the election actual locations, we are confident that we'll be able to have a good election process.
And just a quick follow, would you support making the mail-in registration and absentee ballot registration and voting more accessible and more streamlined? For example, not requiring a notarized signature?
Well, I think I'm not that familiar with the law, but I've voted absentee periodically over the last 60, not 60 years, but ever since I started voting. And it's never been too much of a challenge for me. I'll go to the county clerk and register and get my absentee ballot. And so I don't think it's an onerous process. If the legislature wants to look at it a little bit differently, I'm sure that's their prerogative. But at this point, it's never been an impediment to me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, the Star Tribune. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about the distribution of CARES Act funding from the SLIB. Time sort of seems like the essence, especially for the hospitals who are trying to stand up programs before that December deadline. You mentioned you guys were working on streamlining that process. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Sure, yeah. There's a lot that's in the work. Obviously, we have a number of proposals that are coming up for the 6th. We're hoping that we have a much better consensus process. The last time we took a lot of time kind of walking through some of the proposals. It was the first time for us, the first time we've been looking at it. I think the expectations from communities, and I want to thank them for their patience as they helped us work through it. City of Cheyenne, for example, was looking at trying to bring a very large request. Their attorney, Mike O'Donnell, said, we just want a place marker early in the process to make sure we can get as much money as we can. That's a paraphrase, not a direct quote. So we started to look at that and think about little places like Yoder, Pine Bluffs, Daniel, and others, and how do we assure that that process is fair and equitable across for all communities, same with counties. So we wanted to make sure that we had a process that respected the requests of the individual communities and didn't just sort of get it all out for whomever was there first. but we had a process that allowed communities, and that's what we're working on next week, that allows communities to start spending immediately and being able to get that money deployed. Same thing with the hospitals. We had 2 requests, one quite large from South Lincoln, and it kind of walked through a long process. It sort of said if we're going to add testing capacity, which is COVID related, we can only do that by changing up the configuration of the hospital, and we had a $5 million request that looked a lot like rebuilding the hospital. And then, we had another hospital that showed up and said we have a much more modest, what we think is truly COVID related, not sort of a domino. And we want to make sure that we adequately and properly hear both of those requests and analyze them in the proper context so that we do the most that we can, really across the state, for all our communities, and not just have it go to 1 or 2 projects.
Thanks. Quick follow-up. Has the SLIP considered meeting, more often or more regularly than sort of regularly scheduled meeting?
Yeah, and I think if you look at how the SLIB has met over the last couple of years, you'll see it meets a lot more often than it has before. And I think we recognize already, we're trying to figure out another meeting after the 6th. We recognize the need to get this money dealt with quickly, and so we're prepared to meet almost on an as-needed basis. We understand the urgency of this, and we also understand our responsibility. Thanks. Next question. Well, if there are no further questions, again, I thank you very much. We're at, as I say, a very tender time in Wyoming. We see these cases sort of bouncing up. It's sad that we had another death today. It really kind of confirms the fact that this is a virus that has to be taken seriously. My friend Doug Ducey in Arizona said this is really scary, and I know there are others that are saying it's not. And I'm very glad that we're in a region of the country which has had relatively fewer cases, and we've done it with more open economies. My friend Doug Burgum up in North Dakota, my other friend Christy Nome in South Dakota, we constantly talk, as I do with Pete Ricketts. We're trying to make sure that we find that right balance that doesn't impinge on people, and make sure that we're open. But make no mistake, this economy can be closed if people are careless. We see that. We saw that with the potential for readiness to be reduced if we suddenly have a large contingent of soldiers who come down with COVID. We see that in little communities up in northern Wyoming where a daycare had an outbreak and suddenly the bank was offline for 2 weeks, as was a restaurant there. Not because of any governor's orders or any health officer order or anything else, but by the fact that this outbreak happened. Let's be mindful. Let's be really thoughtful as we go forward. Right now, Wyoming feels pretty good. As I get around the state, I've been to the steer roping finals up in Torrington, people respectfully watching rodeo. I've been to the team roping down here in Cheyenne. We're doing what Wyoming does. We had the Central Wyoming Fair and Rodeo sale, and it went off without too much of a hitch. So let's just be mindful about it. Let's make sure our kids get back to school. Let's make sure that we have a successful fall, because that's what's going to be important for us to get out of this economic slump. So God bless you. Thanks very much for tuning in today, and please enjoy the rest of the week and the weekend. Thanks.